When 10th edition Warhammer dropped and Leviathan came out, me and tons of other people became Tyranid players overnight, and I was excited. I wanted to expand the army and get it ready for the tabletop, and so reading through the index, that meant Zoanthropes. So I went to the Games Workshop web store to buy some Zoanthropes, and they were out of stock. And so I called every single local game store around me, and they were all out of stock because Zoanthropes are awesome, and every single person and their mom and their dad and their dog were trying to get Zoanthropes all at the exact same time, and there were none to be had. Eventually, after much searching, I managed to get 2 boxes, and I paid full price. And these guys were expensive, but it was glorious because I had Zoanthropes. But now that the dust has settled, I want to add more Tyranids to my collection, and I am all out of money. But this is a dual build kit. This box doesn't just build Zoanthropes, it can also be made into Venomthropes. In fact, Venomthropes are the ones that are actually on the box art. If I can use the leftover bits to get 2 more squads of Tyranids out of these boxes, it'll make this purchase so much more worthwhile because it was really expensive. The Zoanthropes are these little psychic worms, where the Venomthropes are bundles of tentacles. I remember when I was first building this kit, there was a good amount of leftover bits. The 2 units are very different from one another, really only sharing the tail, body, and smokestacks. The Venomthropes are made up of gloopy fat bodies, barbed tentacles, and Cthulhu faces. I cut off all the bits, leaving the sprues completely empty. Now that I've completely emptied the Venomthrope Zoanthrope sprues, I can take stock of what I've got to work with, and I've got the most important parts. I got the bodies, I got the heads, and I've got all of the weapons. So that's pretty good, but I am missing the tails, the chests, and the stovepipe exhaust port thingies that the Tyranids have on their back, so I definitely have a lot to work with, but it is going to be a challenge. The bodies are pretty good, but I don't have anything used to make good chimneys, so I'm gonna have to cover these bits up. And I have an idea of how I'm gonna do that, and it's gonna involve balls. A lot of balls. I took some airsoft BBs and glued these down over the spots meant for the chimneys. And obviously, not all balls are the same size, so I took some pro-acryl mixing balls and used these in some of the spots for variety. I glued these in different positions on the 3 Venomthrope bodies, and now I need to turn them from perfect spheres into gooey balls. I took milliput and squished it in between the balls, filling in the gaps between them and wetting my fingers and pressing down on my balls to smooth them out. Then I pulled off the excess milliput. Then I went in with my sculpting tools and carved little trenches to make it look like the skin was being pulled taut over the balls, like the Venomthropes are about to burst. I took a damp dry brush and rubbed this over the wet milliput to smooth out my shapes, and now I have some very unique Venomthrope bodies. While their backs were drying, I worked on their horns. These have an ugly seam out of the box, and I filled this in with Tamiya Basic Putty, smoothing it with some plastic glue. Now for the heads. Following the instructions, the heads attach to the inside of the bodies that are meant to stand up straight, but I don't have bodies, so I think I need to change this up a little bit and give my Venomthropes a hunchback look. I carved off the neck and then glued on the heads directly to the carapace. Now I have the bulk of my Venomthropes done. I started building my bases. My High Fleet Behemoth is attacking a jungle world currently, so I took some cork and glued it down to the base, making some small cork towers out of rough 1/2-inch cork. I tore these up to make some rock shapes and filled in some more of the base with finer 1/4-inch cork. Now for the decorations. I took some epic basing alien eggs and glued these down to all the flat cork that was still exposed, tearing up everything else, leaving me with a jagged texture. I smoothed everything out using some leftover milliput from the Venomthropes backs, and I pressed wet cork into the putty to leave behind a perfect cork texture. Then I took some epic basing plants, put a drop of super glue on each one and pressed it into the wet clay. After that, I took some sand, some medium grit and fine grit, and sprinkled this onto the base over some wood glue, my favorite glue for sand. I find it holds a little bit stronger than Elmer's glue. In some spots, I wanted to build up more depth to the sand, so I sprinkled it on and then locked it in place with ultra thin super glue. Then, as a final step, I brushed on some scenic glue and sprinkled on just a little bit of coconut husk to add some realistic dirt. So I've got my Venomthrope and I've got my bases, and I need to figure out a way to attach the 2. And I don't quite know how. Usually they have a little shrimpy body that connects it, but I don't have any more of those, so I'm gonna have to come up with something else for this weird little bug dude. And speaking of weird little bug dudes, there's plenty from today's sponsor, Ravaged Star by Mini Wargaming. Ravaged Star is the newest miniatures game from our friends over at Mini Wargaming. Face off with epic miniatures in an all-new universe. Now joining the fray with the veil touched are the Amari, a race of dwarves with humongous mechs, and the Gorkorg, fleshy, spiky, bug-like monstrosities that are here to ruin the galaxy. It's not too late to head on over to GameFound to make a pledge to get your very own collection of Ravaged Star miniatures started today. The modularity of the packs available gives you everything you could want. Looking for a 2-player starter set for you and a buddy? There's one available featuring each of the factions going head-to-head with an exciting assortment of models. Interested in just one of the awesome factions? There are packs available for each of them, giving tons of options so you can build up your forces exactly how you want. I've played many games of Ravaged Star. It's a wonderful and tight miniatures game. Worried about not having someone to play with? The community for Ravaged Star is here to prove you wrong. Head on over to miniwargaming.com/RavageStar and join in the Poppin' Discord to join in the fight. And don't forget about the GameFound campaign. It's still going and you can get your awesome minis there. Link is in the description. So I've been tinkering with some ideas of how to connect my Venomthropes to the bases, and I think I've got it figured out. I can use some fluff. This is polyester stuffing for pillows. I've been using it to make some smoke tokens for 40k, and it should be just the thing. And it's perfect that it's already black. It would be really hard to paint it if it was white. I drilled into my bases and inserted a brass rod so that my Venomthropes can be floating. I used my Zoanthropes as a guide for how high they should float, and then I clipped the wire. Now for the fluff. I tore off little chunks and stabbed them over the wire. Then I poured on copious amounts of super glue and pressed the bodies into the fluff. Then I took a popsicle stick and pressed the fluff into the glue so that it looks like the fluff is coming out of his body. It worked pretty good, but pro tip, you should put some milliput in the body so that the wire has something to sink into. It took me a massive amount of glue to get them to stay without that. I glued on the tentacle arms, and even though I've rotated the bodies 90 degrees, it still looks really good. It looks like they were meant to be this way. I pulled at the fluff behind my Venoms to make it look like the smoke is trailing off behind my dudes, and I used lots and lots of ultra thin super glue on the Venom's bodies to make sure that that fluff never goes anywhere. I've got my Venomthropes attached to the bases, and to be honest, it looks a little bit weird. But I'm kind of okay with it looking a little bit weird. Number one, I really like how different these guys look to the regular Zoanthropes. Even though they're essentially the exact same model kit, they look like two completely separate units. And I think my guys are actually far more accurate to the lore than the original models. The Venomthropes are supposed to be constantly obscured by gigantic clouds of toxic smoke. And that smoke's produced from the gases inside of them. And the gases are actually how they move. They have the fly keyword and they do actually fly, but unlike the Zoanthropes who are held up by magic, these guys float along the battlefield like a balloon with just the right amount of helium in it. And their long tentacles grab onto things on the ground and drag them across the battlefield. It's a really cool bit of lore that I don't think the original models really showed off all that well. Do little balls of fluff show that off really well? I would say right now I'd give them a 50-50, but I'm really excited to see what happens when I paint them up. I primed the models in black, and this would have been impossible if my fluff wasn't already black from the start. Then I sprayed on white over the Venomthropes' bodies, letting it spill onto the fluff and base. Then I airbrushed magenta from underneath. This is my base coat, and for the fleshy bodies, contrast paint is going to be just the tool for the job. I put thinned down skeleton horde over the balls. This tints the magenta into a really sickly flesh color, and I sprayed a tan from above to brighten the tops of each tentacle. Then I took Plague Bearer's flesh, which is a sickly green color, and put this over the skin. The Venomthropes produce some really nasty gas, and I think this color shows it off well. I glazed some Cadian flesh tone on the underside of his body and arms, and then mixed in some tan and white together and did a dry brushing focusing on the balls and tentacles. All these colors work together to make the grossest looking skin west of the Rockies. Now for the carapace. I took a dark blue and base coated all the little bits of exposed armor and his claws. I airbrushed a light blue over the armor and then put a coat of Leviathan blue to darken it. This made it almost black, and I brought back the color saturation and highlighted the edges and shapes of the armor with a dry brushing of magic blue, doing a final dry brushing of light blue. I'm liking how this is looking, but there's too stark a separation between the clean blue armor and the disgusting skin, so I glazed on some more Cadian flesh tone over the gaps. I spent a little time on their friendly Cthulhu faces, painting on some stripes of tan on the tentacles, and then picking out the eyes with red. Usually I paint my behemoth tyrant bodies red, so getting a little bit of red onto the minis is a nice way to make them feel like they're part of the collection. I've got my 3 little Venomthropes bodies all painted up, and they're looking very Cronenberg-esque. Like, they kind of remind me of The Thing from the movie The Thing. They're very, very gross. And I'm really excited to get them on the tabletop because they're a very interesting unit. Just in their datasheet, they're not bad at all. They throw out 15 attacks, hitting on 3s, anti-infantry 2+, so they're pretty darn good at blending light infantry. But you might not want them to do that because their real power comes from their special abilities. Venomthropes project a 6-inch bubble of cover, and so 2 squads Venomthropes could very conceivably be giving most of a Tyranid army cover. But that's not all, because they also give all infantry units stealth, and a ton of units in the Tyranid Codex are infantry. So all of a sudden, you've got a ton of units that are -1 to be hit, +1 to their saving throw. That is pretty huge, especially for units like the Tyrant Guard. Toughness 8, 4 wounds, -1 to be hit, +1 to saving throw is really, really nice. All from a unit that was just sitting in my bits box. I sprayed the bases with brown in preparation to make a nice bright saturated green forest. I sprayed a bright green ink from above, letting a little bit of that brown show through. This bright green is perfect for the leaves, but on the forest floor, I wanted a bit darker, so I sprayed a dark green speed paint over the base, which I darkened further by brushing this on, so it would sink into the recesses. I thinned down a green wash and put this onto the leaves, and then dry brushed a light green to catch on all the grains of sand. For the alien eggs, I base coated them with a light gray and then highlighted with a white. Then I put a red wash over the eggs, quickly cleaning off my paintbrush and then rubbing the red wash off the top of the eggs with my clean damp brush. For the smoke, I like the magenta and tan overspray that's landed on them, but to tint these into a sickening miasma, I sprayed on some Plague Bearer's flesh over the fuzz. After that, the only thing left to do was to paint the rim of the base black. The Venomthropes are done, and I love the way they turned out. I love these two miniatures together, the Zoanthropes and the Venomthropes, because they're built out of the exact same kit, actually out of the exact same box, but they look completely different. The Zoanthropes look like a beautiful little jewel, and the Venomthropes look like a horrible bundle of nope. I am really happy that I was able to use the leftover bits in the box to get these guys built. Originally, I paid $80 for 3 guys, but now I've paid $80 for 6 guys, 2 squads of 3 units. And I know, I'm speaking directly to the Tyranid players out there now. I know you bought Zoanthropes, but in the immortal words of Emperor Palpatine, use my knowledge, I beg of you. Make yourself some Venomthropes and get more Tyranids on the tabletop. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I am definitely gonna be playing the spit out of these Venomthropes. And as always, thanks for watching.